California Pediatrics, a podcast by pediatricians from the 4 California chapters of the American Academy of Pediatrics, AAP California Chapter 1, 2, 3, and 4. 4 chapters, 1 state, 1 voice. In 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to California Pediatrics, where we discuss topics of interest and spotlight the professional trajectory of our guests. I'm Grant Christman, a pediatric hospitalist.
Hi, and I'm Melissa Ruiz. I'm an outpatient general pediatrician. And today with us, we have two pediatric residents from Orange County that are going to talk about how the way that advocacy has been embedded in resident education is kind of coming together into real life changes for patients.
Hi, my name is Mithya Morton. I'm a third-year pediatrics resident, and I'm about to start training in pediatric emergency medicine.
And I'm Katherine Killmond. I'm currently a chief resident and soon to be outpatient pediatrician.
Awesome. We're so excited to have you guys here. And, we are at Advocacy Day today. This is something that AAP California has done for over a decade now. And I know that, Mithya, you mentioned having come, I think, last year. Mm-hmm. And tell us more about kind of how that spurred you on.
Yeah, I think coming into medical school and pediatric residency, I really wanted to use my voice to make a bigger impact. And first year of medicine, you're not really sure where to start. So I signed up for this conference because I had some good mentors who said, go find some next steps. And that's exactly what this day taught me. It taught me how to use my story to kind of go outside of the hospital walls that we exist in. I'm a little lucky because I'm married to the legal profession, but one of my passions in medicine was about how to help those who are at risk for homelessness, because my husband works in housing. And so I wanted to take a small idea, because most of our patient population, have this issue, and we can't even address some of the medical needs that they have. And so I was like, well, what if everybody else has the same gap that I do? Why not change something about it? So I approached some really great mentors because of skill sets that I learned here and connections that I made in Advocacy Day through AAP. And I said, I want to create an intervention where I just teach pediatric physicians, primary care providers mostly, who encounter this problem all the time. And I was lucky enough to have a good colleague who was a chief resident. And I said, hey, how can I have the medical legal contact. I want to establish the partnership, but maybe let's connect and try to train other residents on it too.
Yeah, so luckily enough that year we were trying to rebuild and rework our advocacy rotation for the residents and make it a little bit more practical rather than just listening to a bunch of different speakers about what they do, but give residents actual skills that they can use, in their practice, whatever they go on to do. And so this was a really perfect opportunity to give them a tangible skill that they could come out of this rotation being able to do for their patients.
I really want to talk about the educational angle because I'm really interested in that.
Yeah.
But before we do that, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what a medical legal partnership is and why that's important for vulnerable patient populations.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the conversations that I had when encountering with public law center and legal aid organizations in particular is that they expressed that a lot of families didn't feel comfortable coming to their offices, right? There's a huge stigma that a lot of our patients face in that area. So I told them, well, families feel really comfortable coming to pediatric physicians, mm-hmm. right? We are a welcoming face and we want to be that aid to them. So I thought one way of doing that was maybe establishing a warm handoff to them. So I invited them to the spaces that we have and saying, well, maybe we can establish more referrals to you in person within our clinics.
Great. And then when you're talking about, and I'm very interested in advocacy curriculum, and we're building that in our program, and it's it's embedded and required now in residency, and a thing that we did not have in our training necessarily. I think it was just coming about when we were going through training, and going to that skill building, right? And so, what was kind of that skill building that you've implemented or you're implementing in your program?
Yeah, so in this specific example, Mithya's husband very kindly came and gave a talk to a group of our residents who were on their advocacy rotation about, how can we as physicians actually advocate and like write these letters for reasonable housing accommodations. And that's a skill that, we don't really get taught as physicians. Patients come to us with these kinds of problems and we're like, I'm actually not even sure how to solve that. If you're lucky and you have a legal partnership that you can send them to, that's great. But, a lot of pediatricians in practice probably don't have that ability. And so he gave a lecture to some of our residents and allowed us to record it so we could share it with future groups of residents. And Mithya can speak a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so the reasonable accommodation process, because he and a lot of public organizations felt the barrier in the other end, where they would get letters from physicians and they were not appropriate letters that they could really use in the litigation process. And so it was just a matter of like, okay, well, there's this gap. So let's figure out the 3 things that you really need us to appropriately advocate for our patients so that we could work together in this. And that was one of the huge lessons I feel like I learned through mentors and colleagues through AAP, is that we're all doing the same kind of work, but when we come together and not working within these silos but together as a unit, then we can really put together some of these ideas. And then that idea started a trickle effect because we did it in our pediatric residency, and then we saw it, pass on to not only within our clinics, to other clinics, and also the family med unit. And we just started, progressing it even further and further, and it became a start of a medical legal partnership.
So really you started, I'm hearing like there's leveraging of like using not only the pediatric residency program, but kind of all maybe not all, but many of the like primary care residency programs under the GME umbrella at your institution. That's an incredible idea, because I think that that's something that we don't necessarily access, in that interprofessional communication and collaboration isn't always there. And I think that's a nice place to start. And we all like want to be advocates for our patients. So I think that's really incredible. I love that idea, and it's something I think I mentioned to you that I have wanted to start a medical legal partnership and have never really like taken that next step. And when lots of residents are at different sites, what does that look like? Yeah. So that's an interesting concept. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Have you seen the residents sort of responding to the education they received and taking more action with their individual patients?
Yeah, I mean, I think even just talking to like our social workers at our different sites, they feel, because they were doing a lot of that end of the work, right? So in addition to training pediatric professionals, I was like, okay, let me take this even further. So I started reaching out to specialty clinics, and I talked to social workers, case managers, because they were doing a lot of this work for physicians. And then not only seeing my own colleagues being like, hey, I feel more confident about like when a patient comes in and they tell me what to do, I know at least one next step that I can take. And then also hearing it secondhand from case managers, social workers, PAs, NPs being like, oh, I feel less of a burden with this now, because physicians are writing better letters for me to hand off to the legal representative. So it's been a really incredible effect from just like one idea and connecting with really like-minded colleagues of how we can make a better impact for our kids.
That's awesome. And then I'm just thinking about how like what's the next level, right? Because this is housing, but when we talk about stepping back to all the kind of social determinants and all the unmet social needs that our patients face, thinking like where what those letters look like. I'm thinking to immigration letters and all the letters that I probably have written that have not been particularly helpful. And so like what components? So is there any thought to kind of expanding what this looks like for the resident training?
I think a good place to start, and what I kind of have learned this year in developing this, or helping to develop this curriculum, is that there's a lot that's already going on within my institution, and I'm sure that's true of like your institution and everyone's hospital that they work with, that we might not necessarily know about as physicians. And so I've spoken with our like population health department and our patient education department, which I didn't even know existed, to kind of get a sense of like what kind of work are they doing in the community, like what resources do they have that we can refer our patients to, or that we can actually get involved with. Because I learned from talking with these individuals that they're like, oh, like you guys would be interested in like coming to our events or like speaking about certain things. medical topics to the community. And I was like, of course we are. Like, why wouldn't we? But we weren't aware of each other's like presence in the hospital and like our similar interests. And so I think like bridging that gap is probably the first step to just kind of almost do like a needs assessment of like, what like resources do we even have in the hospital already that are established, and like, what more partnerships might we need?
Does your hospital have a multidisciplinary advocacy collaborative more generally?
Not in like a formal sense, but I think this is kind of the
We're developing.
Sounds like it's evolving right now.
Right.
Well, and that concept in all institutions, right? Especially when we have graduate medical education in our institutions, I think that's a really that's interesting, and I think getting out of our silos, even in our one institution, right? Yeah. So I think that's incredible.
And I think for any resident, it doesn't even have to be within the hospital walls. Like once you step one room outside of the hospital wall, go to any community center, I bet every resident will find one community leader in there who will connect them to at least 10 people. Because that's like what happened. Let's say I didn't have this contact with legal aid or whoever. I'm sure if I went to one community meeting, somebody would have been like, oh, you want to help in this way? Let me connect you to X, Y, and Z. And then you could do the same exact thing with whatever interest that you have. So I think the biggest lesson is just like getting out of your comfort zone to advocate for your patients.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for leaving us with that. Thank you guys so much for sharing this. This is really exciting, and you've left me with a lot of ideas for my own work with our residents, probably you as well.
Absolutely.
And we really appreciate your time today.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for joining us.
That was such a great conversation, and I think I do always want to remind myself and remind residents and remind students that like you don't necessarily have to create this whole huge program in your time of training. That's a lot, but taking those first steps, and we really see how so much can happen between people who are motivated and excited and really do go outside of those hospital walls, outside of the clinic room.
Yeah, and that's something that starts as a really small focused initiative can catch fire and spread really quickly, even beyond, for example, the pediatric specialty, if that's where you're starting with your trainees. I think it was also really kind of inspired and humbled to hear that participating in an educational event like Advocacy Day can lead to something that's really impacting patients every day.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the training that's going on now in advocacy that we're a part of, and that is happening nationwide and definitely in California, is very exciting. So it was so nice to be able to share that with everybody. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for being with us. We hope you'll join us again.